Hey, my name's Elijah from the ACPT team, and today I want to tell you about what's new in ACPT 2.1. We're going to jump right into the first new feature, which is custom content types. Custom content types allow you to actually create and manage your own custom database tables within your MySQL database. This lets you move things out of the post meta table, which can help with performance, and custom database tables have some features like indexing and foreign key options that can be really helpful with certain types of setups. Let me go ahead and show you how you're going to create your own custom database tables in ACPT 2.1. So under ACPT in the WordPress admin menu, you're going to go to All Tables. And this is where you can create your own custom tables. To create a new table, just click Create New Table. And here you can walk through all the steps. I'll just go through it quickly. We'll create one called books, and we're not going to add it to a group yet. I'll show you what table groups are like and what they're for here in just a minute. ID strategy can stay at default, but you have a few other options there. We do need to choose an icon, so we'll choose a dash icon here and let's search for book. I'm sure there's one in there. There we go. Another really cool feature of custom content types is that it allows you to create REST API endpoints for your custom database tables. This is awesome if you're doing like headless front ends or even using non-WordPress frameworks to build something out and you still want to use WordPress as kind of your database engine. This allows you to do that. By default, read, delete, create, and update are all enabled. And the nice part is this endpoint is only for this table, so you don't need to have an endpoint that has access to the post meta table, for instance, or even the posts table. So it's much more secure this way. You can kind of isolate the content that needs to be exposed externally for these types of operations while keeping everything else secure. I'm going to leave all of this at default, including the menu position, capability, which allows us to determine who has access to this database table, character set and collation, timestamps, which just adds a couple of extra columns created at and updated at to the table to help keep track of when things are changing. And then we have the soft delete option, which instead of deleting a row from the table, when you delete it, it'll actually just add a new column that marks the row as deleted, which will tell the UI not to display it and basically treat it as if it's not there, but it's still recoverable in the database. And then we have a bunch of database options here that we can select from, but I'm not going to get into any of those for this demo. With all that set up, we can go to the next step. Here is where we can actually create all the columns or the data that we want to store in our database table. So first off, we have this advanced mode option, which shows us the actual field types that we would be using within the database, but I'm going to leave it on the more basic mode. And then we have this no distractions option, which just makes everything go full screen, which is kind of nice when you're building something like this out. So I'm going to keep this pretty simple. I'm going to drop in a text field and we'll call it title. And each field also has a bunch of options. Of course, we have the column label, column name, column length, column options. We can set it as the primary key, which we don't need to do in this case because we told the database table to create an ID key as the primary key. So we don't need to designate our own. We can designate whether this is nullable or not. Basically, can it store a null value? And whether it needs to be unique within the table. Then under UI, we have a bunch of other options. We can choose which type of UI we actually get when we're working with this field or column, headline location, vertical alignment, just a bunch of display options. Then we can set it to allow HTML if we want, and we can set a minimum value. Next up, we have our conditional logic, which allows us to set conditions under which to actually show this field. So we can choose a location, for instance, then we can set our condition equals, not like, blank, etc. And then we can put in a value. And this just basically allows us to determine when this field or column shows in the UI or in the backend based on some other value. And then let's move on to validation rules. Here we can add rules to validate the actual value within this column to make sure it matches what we're expecting to see. Then the last one is permissions. So under permissions, we can actually set which roles have access to this specific column. So you'll note that permissions are pretty granular with these custom content types. We were able to set a capability restriction on the table itself, and now we're able to set a role restriction on the column. So you can really kind of mix and match and make sure that only the correct people have access to each piece of data. But we don't need this in this case, so I'm going to close that out, and we'll go up here and close out that field's options. Now we just need another field. We'll drop in maybe a number field and drag that in, and we'll call this ISBN. Now I don't need to tweak anything on this field, so I'm just gonna turn off the no distraction mode and we can move on to the next steps. Now, indexes is where you can index specific columns in the database to make them faster to query. For example, if you're setting up, like we are here, a database of books, and you want to be able to query by the ISBN number, you can index the ISBN column, which will make it much faster and easier to find via queries. And then finally, we have the foreign keys options. Foreign keys allow you to associate data in one database table with data in another database table. For example, if I set up a foreign key in books where I'm connecting, say, an author field to the authors table, which could be another custom content types table that I've created, there are a couple of benefits. First of all, I can't put an author in that field in my books table if the author isn't present in the authors table. So it enforces data validity. Secondly, foreign keys allow you to determine what happens when a piece of connected data is deleted. For example, if I delete an author, but it was already associated with some books in the books table, how do we handle that and what is the result? Foreign keys give you the ability to determine what happens in cases like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and save this table. And you'll note the first time that you create a table in ACPT, it's gonna say not created and have this create table button. The cool thing is when you click this, it's gonna show you the exact command that's gonna be executed to create the table. Let's go ahead and click yes, execute it. And now our table is actually created in our database. And you'll note we also have books over here, which has its own interface just like a post type. And if we add a new book, you'll see the title and ISBN fields here for us to manipulate. So even though it's kind of like a post type with custom fields, behind the scenes, it's much more performant and clean because it's all contained in its own database table and not intermingled with other posts and post meta and things like that. That's where some of your performance issues come from when you're dealing with custom post types with a lot of custom data. Custom content types is not going to have those performance issues. Now we need to talk about table groups. So if we go over to ACPT again in the admin panel and go to table groups, we can create a table group. Let's go ahead and click create new group. And here we can just call it bookstores and it gives us a group name automatically. This group basically allows us to pick a set of custom content types or custom database tables and display them in either a standard view accordion, horizontal tabs, or vertical tabs. And we can choose the context, just kind of like setting up a post meta box. I'm going to leave this at normal and we can set a priority. Then we get to choose which tables are included in this group. Now we only have one, but you can select multiple tables to display them all within the same group. That's where the accordion and tabbed layouts really come in handy. And finally, we get to determine where this group is going to be shown. This is kind of like setting up a field group where you get to determine where it appears or where it applies to. In this case, we can choose post type, post parent, etc. I would say option page makes the most sense here for this type of setup where I might want like a bookstore management page where I can see all the books that I have in my database. And then if we had an options page, we'd be able to select it over here. And then this table group would be shown on that options page. So there is a lot more to custom content types because it basically is an interface for your MySQL database. And because it allows you to create custom database tables, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of different options you can get into. But as you saw here, it's super easy to create a basic table without knowing anything about MySQL or custom database tables in general. Now that about covers the new custom content types feature in 2.1. The next thing I want to show you is our unified canvas UI, which you saw actually already when we were setting up our custom database table. But that interface, which we use to drag and drop fields, is also available anywhere that you're building structured data. So for instance, if I'm setting up a field group, I'm going to see this same interface and I can drag and drop fields, reorder them, etc. So you're going to have this unified experience no matter where you're setting up structured data within ACPT, which just makes it a bunch easier because once you learn this UI once, you know how to work with pretty much every type of structured data that ACPT offers. Now, in this release, we also fixed 227 code issues, and we've implemented automated testing, which means essentially that we can ship releases faster while making sure nothing breaks. So again, I'm Elijah from ACPT, and that's what's new in ACPT 2.1.